Hello there, and welcome to Haman Nature. I am Adam Haman, and on today's show, I have an interview with the great libertarian theorist and patent attorney Stephan Kinsella. I believe it's his third or fourth appearance on the show, and I ask him some probing questions about uh, anarcho capitalism and libertarian legal theory and philosophy. And then in the back half, I talked to him about his life because it's a very, very interesting one. So please enjoy.
Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Hello, Stephan. Welcome back to Haman Nature.
Hey, Adam.
Very good to see you again. I thought today I would ask you a couple questions about philosophy and anarchy. And then I kind of want to hear the story of Stephan Kinsella, if you would indulge us.
Sure.
Okay. My partner on this here show, Tyrone, the porcupine hobo, was talking to me about you in an episode we did a few months ago, and he said something that surprised me. He said that he learned from you, and he couldn't remember if he read it or if he heard you say it on a podcast somewhere, that our pitiful species here is never going to get to anything close to Ancapistan unless we get to a high enough level of technology that we have not gotten to yet. Did he hear you right? Or what are your thoughts on that?
That's not exactly what I think, but I've kind of had comments over the years. I think when I was younger, my thought was that the only way to achieve liberty was if enough people had read economics in one lesson.
Okay.
Effectively, enough people became economically literate. So I was thinking, like, the purpose of activism was intellectual activism to spread the word. I kind of no longer believe that, because I don't think that we're going to achieve liberty by handing out copies of something to people who are just not that intellectually interested.
I agree.
And also, I think it may be too early we think we're advanced because of our technology, but we're really in a primitive species still. We just figured out some things maybe a little too early. We came out of the trees too soon, as I've said before.
Sure.
Now we have atomic weapons that can kill people, but we're still superstitious in lots of ways. I don't think it's impossible to get a free society. I think we could achieve it. What I meant by that technology comment was, I think that if I envision a free society, which could happen earlier than we think, if we're lucky with some breaks, maybe AI, maybe technology, maybe post scarcity,
Yeah.
or maybe Bitcoin, something like that. But what I've been thinking for several years now is that the way we would achieve liberty is if people are basically libertarian, but not by education, but just because
culture.
They've absorbed it culturally. And the example I've always thought of was the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 or so. Up until that point, lefties could argue that, we need central planning and communism or socialism was as good or better than capitalism. But after that, everyone sort of realized that capitalism is one. And people that say that now don't really have a deep understanding of free markets and economics, but they kind of generally recognize that if you go too far with the government or with planning, it's going to not produce the goods. So there's been a general increase in people's understanding of freedom just because they live in a society which is more capitalistic and relatively prosperous. So I always thought that we would have a free society when we reach a point where it's like that. And how are we going to get there? I could imagine that we have a society that's so rich because of technology that just keeps increasing that, the incentive to steal just goes down. So,
right.
So we have property rights, but, I don't care if you take my car because I can make another one for $1.
Right.
And why would you take it anyway if you can have one for free? So
The way Tyrone had internalized your comment, I think, was something like, we can only have pure free market anarchy if we were all rich enough and isolationist enough, and that we could like literally hit your replicator button and pop out that car, that we wouldn't need to form associations or need a state. But I pushed back. I said, I don't get that. It seems like our type of society is at its best. Well, it's great no matter what our technology is. And maybe it's even more important when we're not as rich and we need to come together with the correct set of institutions such that we maximize. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I think I may have been fantasizing. I think I might have been saying that it would be great if we had technology so that everyone had this army of robots or a force field or something that were effectively invulnerable, and so we can't be coerced by the state.
I see.
We have our own armies. I just meant like it was like a fantasy. Like if we had technology and wealth on a par with the states, then the state would become ineffective, and we would just have to. But I wasn't saying we wouldn't have society and productivity and division of labor and all that.
Oh, I get it now. Yeah, that's a great point. We aim to evolve in our private lives such that the state is irrelevant or redundant, and what would do a better job of that than force fields or robot armies or something. Oh, okay.
But I was kind of making the point. That was also a way to make the point that there's a difference between descriptive and prescriptive statements, between ought and is, and between the laws of causality and moral or ethical laws. The laws of the universe cannot be violated. So if gravity is a true law, you don't have to agree with it. You just cannot violate it. It's a physical law. But prescriptive laws or normative laws are telling you what you should do. And fortunately or unfortunately, we have free will and we can choose to disregard other people's rights. So rights can be violated. So I was imagining like some kind of omnipotent, benevolent satellite up in space that prevented rights violations, or equivalently or alternatively your own force field, so that it would be impossible to violate people's rights. It was that kind of thought experiment too.
I gotcha. I still really struggle over the ought is gap, which is kind of what I want to ask you about now. I'm going to do something totally unfair now.
By the way, just to make sure, your voice is silencing to me. I'm not sure if it's recording that way, but maybe it's fine on your end. That's better.
Sounds okay to me.
That's
maybe
better.
Maybe it's just me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was listening to your podcast number 444, where you were chatting with a guy named Alex Anarcho, or at least that's what he goes by. And yeah, so it's totally unfair. You probably don't remember this exchange, and I'm going to parrot it back to you and then ask a question. So I'm sorry about that. Early on, he asks you about the distinction between objective rights versus subjective rights. And you quickly chime in to say that distinction is wrong. But then you brilliantly derive the rules that work for our species in a social setting and call them literally objective or non-arbitrary, based in reality, as, quote, the only objective rules that would satisfy the original purpose of people to come together to generate rules, that is, to avoid conflicts.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which sounds like what he was asking you to begin with, and it plays into, the whole premise of my show, Haman Natures, we're trying to figure out, what rules and institutions and norms are appropriate for our species, given where we're at, which is, trying to figure out an ought from an is.
Right.
And so, yeah, I have several different angles to probe at that issue, but what do you have to say thus far?
I don't remember the first question about subjective versus objective, but I do think that when you try to justify a rule or a norm which has a sort of normative or ethical component. We're saying that the way people should act, the way we should organize our affairs, that's what rights talk and moral talk and normative talk is all about. We have to propose a rule, as Hoppe would say. You propose a norm, and then it has to be justified, argumentatively justified. And that argument, I think you have to take as a starting point that when you have that argument, it's between two people who are already adopting a certain stance towards each other, a certain kind of proto-peaceful stance that we're at least sitting down and not hitting each other. We're not coercing each other. We're not trying to threaten each other to accept each other's statements and comments, but we're both willing. We're willing to walk away and agree to disagree, and that right there is sort of a presupposed proto norm or meta norm that undergirds whatever you could propose as a norm that could be justified. But the point is, you walk into this with a sort of equality assumption, and that is that we're both equal in the sense that we're both capable of engaging in argument with each other. So we're essentially equal. Like the first assumption is we're equal. And so if I propose that my rule is that I own everyone else and I own you, and the reason is because I'm me and you're you, then that's simply essentially not giving an argument. It's just arbitrary. It's just devolving to brute force. Then whoever's stronger is going to win. You have to actually give a reason, which is what it means to that's what the requirement of universalizability of Kant and Hoppe means. It means the rule you propose has to be of general and universalizable applicability. Sorry, I had a stroke last year. I still struggle over my words sometimes.
That was a lot of syllables for just 2 words.
I know. The point is, you have to just give reasons. They have to be a reason, and they can't be just a made up reason, an arbitrary reason. It has to be grounded in the nature of things.
Yes.
So that's where objectivity comes into it. It's actual facts that you can appeal to. So if I say, well, I own you because I'm me and you're not me, that's a particularizable rule. It's not really a general universalizable rule. But if I say, okay, you're black and I'm white, and I can own you because I'm superior to you, then the answer is why? And the answer is because I'm white and you're black. Well, unless I can show the relevance, so that's a distinction, but you have to show the relevance of the distinction. And what's the relevance of skin color to the capacity to have rights? There's no relevance, because rights don't come from skin color. So you can reject some distinctions as not being relevant, and you can reject other distinctions as being just false, like not grounded in the nature of things. So you can say women don't have the same rights as men because they're weaker. Well, physical strength also has nothing to do with rights. Okay. So that's why I think that the natural law argument is that we have rights because of our nature. And the problem with the natural rights argument is that it goes from an is to an ought. It says, because of the way we are, therefore this is what we should do. And there are problems with that. But even if you go with a sort of a hypothetical or a transcendental argument like Hoppe, where you try to avoid going from is to ought, you're going from ought to ought. You're pointing out that there's a base level ought, what I call a Grundnorm, following Hans Kelsen's terminology. It means a kind of a ground level or base norm. And that's what Hoppe points out is presupposed in any argument. So argument is normatively loaded in a sense. It's impossible to have an argument that doesn't take some norms into account, like the preferability or the desirability for peace, because you're having a peaceful argument. So you build on those norms to get higher level norms like political norms, but you take into account facts and distinctions which are grounded in the nature of things. So that's where nature enters into it, or objective. So we say objective rights are the rights that, according to man's nature, are objectively the ones that can satisfy the very purpose of rights, which is to permit peace, and that would permit resources to be used. So that would require original appropriation or homesteading to be one of the norms you have to agree is justified. Otherwise, we wouldn't be alive. Things like that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how objectivity enters into it, and human actual nature, human nature.
No, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. One of the other ways I wanted to sort of get at this issue is you hear people all the time bring up, like, if you try to make a natural rights argument, they'll just scoff at you and say, well, you can't derive an ought from an is.
Right.
But then every time they certainly believe that there are oughts, that
Right.
there are ethic, and where are they getting them from?
Correct.
In every single case, they're pointing to some kind of an is,
Correct.
up to and including the big one, which is we have these ethical truths that are given to us by Almighty God. Surely the most ultimate is that there possibly could be.
Correct. But even God would just be, it's like when people say, what's the purpose of life? What they're assuming is that for life to have meaning or to have a purpose, there has to be some purpose provided to you by the state or by the legislature or by God. But all that means is God has his own values and purpose for you, but that's not your purpose. Like, what if I don't want to do what God wants me to do? Or what if the God is evil? And it's the same thing with pushing it back a level. Yeah. So effectively, these people, what the truth is, when they enter into civil discourse, they're already presupposing certain common norms. I mean, very few people would say, well, I want the human race, I want to adopt some rules that would make the human race live in misery. Almost everyone agrees with the kind of common sense, general aims of peace and prosperity, if it's possible. So you have to propose a norm that's compatible with that. And then if they ask you, well, then you're going from an is to an ought, what's your proof of the norm, of the value that people should live in peace and prosperity? You can just ask them, well, what's your proof? We agree with each other already. Why are we fighting about something we already agree on?
I wonder if part of the problem is trying to smuggle in the language of mathematics and logic. Like, it's not really about proof exactly. It's about arguments and reasons. That's different than a proof.
Agree. And I think also there's a reluctant, there's a hostility towards religion, or because I don't know if you remember, there's a guy named Robert Anton Wilson who was a well-known science fiction writer, but also a libertarian, and he wrote these hilarious books in the 70s. But he wrote one book. It was a nonfiction book. It was called Natural Law, or maybe it's Natural Rights, or Don't Put a Rubber on Your Willy. So he was making fun of the idea of natural law because he used the Catholic Church and their prohibition on condoms. But so he's equating anyone who believes in natural rights or natural law as being in favor of some religion's conception of it. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater in this case. I mean, you can have natural rights reasoning that it's not silly and that is grounded in the nature of things. It still runs into the is-ought gap, I believe, but I think that's sidestepped by Hoppe's approach, by just pointing to norms we all necessarily share by virtue of entering into this conversation. And by the way, someone who doesn't share these norms, like they don't believe in peace and discourse, they wouldn't enter into such a discussion anyway.
Yeah, the way I frame that is we're either sitting down and trying to reason with one another and trying to figure out these norms, or we're fighting. And that's just a different thing. And similarly, when people try to use this, it's like they try to hide their arbitrary edicts based on force by saying things like, well, it's not like we can derive morality from the facts of nature or anything. So it's really just a game of force and what you can compel people into doing. And then they go about the aim of politics and trying to force people into behaving certain ways. And it's like they sidestep the issue of morality altogether.
Right. And then you have someone like Milton Friedman, who was great, but he didn't have a really good basis for his own libertarian instincts, because so he wrote this thing saying, he said something effectively that you have to be tolerant of others because we're ignorant of what the true morals in life should be. It's almost like it's almost like he said, if you really knew what the right way to live is, then people would be justified in using force to force you to live the good life. So therefore, you have to admit that we can't know anything about the right way to live so that we can be tolerant of others. I think he's wrong. I mean, I think you can know a good way to live, like just a common sense way of living. Like it's better to live a productive, peaceful, honest life than to live a life stealing and murdering and mayhem, without thinking that just because we know it's better to live this way, we want to use force to force you. Although we libertarians do want to use force to force you to live the good life. It's just that our conception of the good life is so broad that the only thing we're going to use force against is aggression,
self-defense.
Yeah.
No, that's all great. This is going way better than I thought it would. The last way I want to try and frame this concept is I want to throw something I heard Jordan Peterson say fairly recently, that he wasn't really talking about the issue we're talking about, but it seemed to align so perfectly. He was talking about God, and he was trying to come up with some, he's trying to meld, the religious with a non-religious person's conception of why these ideas and principles might be useful. So he's trying to define God, and he says it's something like, quote, the hierarchy of values that allow humans to thrive in an iterative interpersonal process over time. And I'm sure he's bringing other values into that sentence in order to make it something that's, more universal values than just what the legal structure should be. But that iterative process over time that allows humans to thrive, that sure does sound like the way you'd want to think about, the ethics and morals and norms in Ancapistan.
And rights, and law, because so the general principle, libertarian principle, is the kind of implicit principle of the common law and the Roman law, the private law, which is that basically people have a right to their bodies. So slavery and murder are wrong, because that's what it means to say it's wrong to murder someone or to hit them or to enslave them, is that they have a property right in their body. That's that's an equivalent statement, which is the non-aggression principle itself. The non-aggression principle, I think, does not apply to owned things. It's sort of a shorthand that applies, that we extend to them, but it really applies to body ownership. And then the other two principles are, the first one, to use an unknown resource has the right to it. That's private property ownership by original appropriation or occupation or homesteading. And then contract. If you can transfer it to someone else, then they're the owner. So those are the core principles, but they're very vague and abstract. And so controversy or disputes might arise where we don't know who the owner is, because it's a difficult case. So then you go to an arbitrator and someone decides it. And then that way, now we have a precedent, and then law develops that way. So law is the fleshing out of that. So over time, we learn more and more cases where we had to figure this out. We have another exception or another rule. And so the legal system and at the same time, the ethical rules develop. So I would think of that like an iterative process, because these rules are ultimately practical. They're to allow us to live in harmony and peace among each other where possible. And that's possible if you look for a solution when there's a dispute and you come up with a reasonable, practical, workable solution that takes people's nature into account. And as far as religion and God goes, I think that, because humans originated as a sort of a primitive species, and, I would think religion was a primitive philosophy. Like, why does the sun rise? Because of the sun god, things like that. And then religion becomes part of life. But for religion to survive, it has to encode and embed practical morals. That's what gives us its strength. But if you preach death and destruction, people aren't going to follow you. So it has to basically take credit for all the evolved and iteratively evolved norms that are practical. It takes credit for those and imbues them with God and all this. So I would think religion is a way to transmit the iteratively developed norms and morals, which are pragmatic and practical.
Yeah, I think that's what it's best at doing.
Yes.
So that the common layfolk don't have to become theologians and philosophers in order to figure out what the right way to behave is. It gets transmitted to them at a very basic level, which is really all you need just to go through your life.
Which is why, even though I'm an atheist, I am not hostile to religion as I used to be, because I know the alternative. I think a secular cosmopolitan society might be best ultimately, but right now, if you get rid of religion, you replace it with statism, and It's worship of the state. I would much rather have worship of religion, because at least it has to encode common sense morals as part of it. The state doesn't have to and doesn't. The state's a perversion of private morality, whereas religion at least has to, a core of it has to be rooted in common sense, decency, and morality.
I totally agree. I don't believe the metaphysical story of any religion I've ever heard, but I find an incredible amount of value in having a sane, rational, productive, peaceful hierarchy of values that is what you get transmitted to you in a good religion. And I think that we evolved to have something, to need something like that.
Yeah, I think that's true. Even that's true.
So if it's not, literally your religion, then it becomes something else, maybe a good philosophy that probably can be a good placeholder. And if you don't have that, then it's something nefarious, statism or something horrible. All right, man, good stuff. I want to do a hard left turn and just ask you about you. I saw you post on social media somewhere a while back, something that you were just, I don't know, you're going through your life and talking about, you've had an incredible life thus far, very productive, incredible intellectual, you've impacted me a whole bunch, and I'm not the only one. So I want to just ask you to talk about your life and maybe just get you rolling on that, because I think it's one worth examining.
Well, it's as I mentioned to you before, it's interesting because I'm fresh on being introspective about some of this, because I just completed helping a guy write a little memoir for me. Not something I'm going to publish. I'm not sure about that yet, but it's not a vanity thing. It's more like something you do as a gift for your kids and stuff, like Christmas.
Yeah.
Someone offered this to me. One of my financial advisors offered my wife and I that they would pay this guy to do it for us. Of course, I took it. It's been a year now. I take it seriously. It's going to be 100-page. This guy does it. I had to teach him what libertarianism is and everything. But it made me think. And, when you're having a busy life, you don't, when you're in the middle of it, I'm 59 now. So it's a good point to look back and think about things I didn't really realize, like the trajectory of my life. Mm-hmm. And I realized lots of things by doing this about what I've done. And I did post something because I had a difficult year last year. In a way, the first difficult year I've ever had. But I'm past it now. But the last year I'm 59, and I had my prostate cancer, which I had a few years ago, came back. So I had to have a prostate biopsy, and that resulted in an infection, which led to sepsis. And because I didn't know it was sepsis, I thought I had stomach flu. So I just ignored it for 5 days. I just kept losing fluids. And so my kidneys shut down one morning, and I had a stroke. So I had a massive stroke and was in the hospital for 7 days because I didn't know I had sepsis. And but I fully recovered.
That's great.
Every now and then I stutter, but no, it's actually pretty good. So I had the stroke, and then my brother died, and then who I was very close with, and then I had the prostate cancer surgery, and I'm recovering for that now. It's all behind me. No heart problems anymore. The prostate cancer is gone. And so this year I've decided I've been trying to do this for 7 years, not to do libertarian traveling for 1 year, because I always end up doing 7 or 8 things. And I wanted to just take 1 year off, but I kept finding excuses not to. This year I'm actually going to do it. I'm not going to do anything until September, when I attend Hapa's Turkey conference. So I'm just focusing on home and family and writing and health. So that's where I am right now. But my story basically is I've been a successful attorney. I'm retired now. And also my sort of my hobby, or my avocation instead of my vocation, has been a libertarian theorist and writer, which I love. And that's my main focus right now. And I tend to do that into my retirement years. I've got several book projects and writing projects I want to keep working on. I just enjoy doing it. And the way it got started was I was from Louisiana, rural Louisiana. And I went to private Catholic schools in the neighboring parish, unlike my brother and sister who stayed local so they could be with their friends. And so for 12 years, I went to private Catholic elementary and high school in Baton Rouge. and then went to LSU. And I always loved philosophy and science as well. And one of the librarians at Catholic high school knew I was into all that. So she suggested I read The Fountainhead in 10th grade. And so I read The Fountainhead, and it blew my mind because I didn't know anything about politics or economics at all back then. I wasn't left or right. I was just totally a void. So I became like a little objectivist for quite a while. I was already becoming atheist, but that helped me, push me over the edge.
Have we talked about this before? My trajectory is exactly the same.
I don't remember if we did.
I didn't understand. I didn't think about politics until I got to college. Assumed I was a Democrat just because they're the good guys. The Republicans are the bad guys.
Yeah.
Realized that the state doesn't have any money unless it steals it first. So I was convinced I was a Republican then.
Yeah.
And I listened to Rush Limbaugh for a handful of months. Immediately decided that was nonsense.
Yep.
And then somebody handed me The Fountainhead, and it was all over.
It was kind of like that for me. Maybe I mean, I was 10th grade when this happened, but I was registered Democrat first because my parents were Democrats, but they were blue dog. They were Reagan voting Democrats, but they were Democrats. So I was registered Democrat initially. I never voted Democrat, but I was registered. But my first election was 84, and Reagan was president. I voted for Reagan. I was kind of becoming libertarian-ish then, but I was conservative. But after that, I voted libertarian every time. But yeah, it was Rand. But then, so I read her links to Hazlitt and Mises, and so I got into all that, and eventually became an anarchist because of David Friedman and Rothbard and the Tannehills and these guys, who your listeners won't know because young people don't read anymore. They only listen to TikTok videos apparently. But anyway.
If you can't put the Tannehills in a TikTok video, nobody wants to hear it.
So I was always fascinated with that side. So I went into electrical engineering because I love technology and I was good at it. But I started sensing that it would be too constricting for me to be an engineer. So I went to grad school for engineering too, electrical engineering. And in grad school, my wife persuaded me to go to law school because I like to argue, and she thought I could make more money. So I went to law school and I loved it because finally I got to think without equations and I could write what I thought. And it was just reasoning that was a different type of reasoning than in engineering. And it kind of satisfied that side of my personality. And so I studied history. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just thoughts are occurring to me as you speak. Do you think that your either style or facility with argumentation, was that impacted by your engineering studies?
I do think so. I think that in my case might be not completely typical because I was told by the chancellor of the law school that engineers, you can go to law school with an engineering degree, but engineers have a tough time in law school. That's what he told me. In retrospect, I think he's wrong. Engineers tend to be more, I think, engineering is more difficult than law school conceptually. Most lawyers couldn't do engineering, but most engineers, if they know how to communicate, could do law school.
Right.
But I do think that my analytical way of looking at things, plus my passion for law itself, beyond what most lawyers have, like I like the theory too, legal theory, and then my love of Austrian economics, praxeology, and free market economics, and then also political theory from the Austrians. All that combined to make me very, very systematic in the way I think about things, I believe. And also, coincidentally, I went to Louisiana State University, which is a reasonably good law school. It's not up there, but it is basically the best of the nation in the Roman law and civil law.
Great.
Because Louisiana is a civil law state. So I learned a lot about Roman law and civil law in addition to the common law. And that ended up helping me because a lot of my libertarian passions benefited greatly from knowing that, like my stuff on contract theory and even intellectual property and property theory. It was just totally coincidental that I happened to study that and use it in my libertarian analysis. I think my writing would have been greatly diminished if I hadn't happened to have that and fell in love with it.
It's so funny.
And one other thing I can mention, I was small and scrawny. This is biographical. I was small and very short until I was about 17. So I was very short, and I was bullied a lot in elementary school. and even early high school. And I do think that sort of made me ripe for libertarianism, because when I read Ayn Rand's, I mean, I always hated injustice and
Yeah.
bullies.
Yeah.
And as soon as I read Rand, I'm like, yeah, the initiation of force is the only way to violate rights, and that's completely wrong. I think in a way that may be ripe for libertarianism in Rand, just that personal history, and passionate about it.
Two quick things. Again, we're like twins here. First year of college, I was pretty sure my degree was going to be electrical engineering. And I switched to business finance just because, I don't know, I thought I'd get rich or something doing
Yeah.
that rather than being pigeonholed in circuits and diodes and whatnot. And then I wasn't ever picked on except like maybe by older kids when I was young. But I was a huge comic book nerd. And that's, that's injustice on fighting injustice on steroids. I mean, I'm very quick to be very emotionally upset by a perceived injustice. I think someone
Yeah.
needs to swoop in and fix
Yeah.
that. So I totally get it.
Yeah, I was a comic book nerd too, of course. I was never a D&D nerd though. I tried it one time and thought it was
I
boring.
couldn't get into that either.
I couldn't.
Ridiculous.
But then, so it started around 1992 when I started practicing law. Well, I did have one interesting thing. After law school, the law firm, I had an offer from a law firm in Houston. I was in Baton Rouge, and my wife had gotten a job offer in my girlfriend, now wife, had gotten an offer to go from an engineering job in Baton Rouge to Houston. And I had an offer from a Houston law firm. So we were going to start our lives and our career in Houston. But my law firm, there was a legal recession at the time, this 1991. And a lot of law firms didn't have enough work for the incoming class of attorneys. So they were firing attorneys before they started, which really screws you if you're a senior in law school and you get a call, your job has disappeared and you haven't been interviewing because you thought you had a job lined up.
Was there a cause for that? Does something happen?
There's just these waves. It was just a legal recession at the time. I don't know. It was just, maybe it was coincidental with an economic wide recession, or maybe it was, it might have been oil and gas related, because I was going to an oil and gas law firm doing oil and gas law, and maybe it was an oil and gas boom and bust thing. I don't know what happened, but this law firm called me and said, we don't have enough work, but we're not going to rescind your offer, but we would like 15 of you of the incoming class, up to 10 to 15 of you, to take an offer to defer starting work for a year, and we'll pay you like half your salary or 1/3 of your salary. So I said, this is great. So I took the money and I went to London for a year and got a master's in international business law, which I love. That was another thing that's helped me in my writing, because I loved international law and international business law. So I had a good year there. So so I went to Houston eventually after, but around the same time then I switched to patent law from oil and gas law so I could move to Philadelphia with my wife. I changed my practice area so I could be more mobile nationally, because oil and gas is a state practice area, but patents are a federal area. So go ahead.
Before you move on, another thought struck me. Studying international law for a year and then becoming a theorist about how anarchy might work. I can't help but see the relationship there.
It has helped too. It's all helped. It's been a kind of serendipitous set of circumstances which helped me in my intellectual pursuits. It wouldn't have all these wouldn't have helped me once you go to the law, you focus on a narrow practice area, and then certain things you learned in law school are helpful, certain things are not. But for me, most of it was helpful because I just love theory. And anyway, so I switched to patent law, and around the same time, so I started thinking, I was writing a little bit on rights theory at the time. I wrote on estoppel in 1992 for Reason Papers. And so I was interested in all these things like contract theory and legal theory. But I was thinking, what about intellectual property? Because I thought it was a good thing because Ayn Rand had said so, but her argument didn't make sense to me.
It was an assertion.
It was an assertion. It's a bad argument. I knew something was wrong with it. So I figured, well, hell, I'm going to take the patent bar and be a patent attorney. And I'll know more about this topic than most libertarians. So maybe I can come up with a good argument for intellectual property. So I started trying to do it. And everything I tried, I ran into walls. And I finally said, let me try the other assumption that it's evil. And I did that, and everything fell into place.
Into place, yeah.
So about the same time I passed the patent bar in 1994, I had started practicing patents in 93, the year before. Right around the same time, I became convinced that the patent system should be abolished. So I started writing these articles. And in the beginning, I was very cautious. I was like writing to the Federal Society newsletters and things like, we patent lawyers, maybe we should take a step back and think, is it really just like, I was asking questions. I thought it would hurt my career if my law firm or if my clients found out I was a rabid abolitionist of patent and copyright. But over time, I realized there's two sides. Like, there's the practical business world, legal law firm side, and there is the libertarian world of academic publishing and all this stuff. And none of them know anything about the other. Right. No one ever read my stuff or cared about it. If they happened to find out I'd written a monograph on something on why to abolish the patent system, they would assume I'm an expert on patents, and they would want to hire me. It never hurt my career at all. But it was kind of funny. The whole time I was practicing this thing I detested. And at first I could separate the two in my mind. Like, I'm doing something in a field that shouldn't exist, but I consoled myself that, well, as long as it exists, you need an attorney to help you navigate this. And also, I only did patent prosecution, which means helping people get patents. And when I helped with litigation defense, I only did on the defense side. I've never helped to assert or enforce or aggressively assert a patent on someone, which would have been a moral quandary for me. But luckily, I never had to do it, or I steered my career so I didn't have to do it. I basically viewed my job as helping people get ammunition, which they could use defensively or offensively. Defensively means you can, if someone sues you for patent infringement, you can countersue them for patent infringement with one of your patents. So it's like having bullets, which you can use for good or for evil. And how people use the bullets I'm selling them is not my business. But even though I had these justifications, after 10 or so years of it, I had enough. So I left the law firm and I joined one of my clients at its general counsel. And I was there for about 10 years. It's a high-tech company. I was doing patents for them, but also all kinds of other stuff like contract law and employment law and immigration law, which I enjoyed. So my career was about 30 years, like 10 years law firm, 10 years general counsel. And then I quit that and just I had my own practice at home, working from home, just doing some private clients, which I basically is down to zero now. So that's kind of what I did. And in the meantime, I kept writing libertarian stuff and enjoying that, going to Mises conferences and building that side of my life. And to the point where that's now dominated. And that's what I've been doing intellectually to fulfill myself. And it's worked out well because in retirement, a lot of people retire and they don't know what to do with themselves. They retire and the rug's pulled out from under them. They don't have, but now I still have my libertarian friends and my conferences and my writing. So that's what I plan to do till I die, basically.
It's great to have purpose when you get let go from the widget factory.
Yes.
And that's all you did your whole life. I can see why people just fall into despair. That's not going to happen to you. Quick question going back. I probably would have been too scared to do it if I was in your shoes. But I would imagine that if you had just been really loud and vocal about your opposition to IP on a philosophical and principled basis, I can imagine that making you more lucrative and valuable just because you are going to be approaching these things from there's only one of you in that whole field.
Well, I think I got a few clients because of it. It never hurt me at all that I could tell. Probably at this point, if I went to a law firm and I applied for a job at 59 years old and they saw all my writing, they might steer clear of me because I've been very vocal about it. But there are other groups that might like it. The problem is most of the money is behind companies that are trying to fight tooth and nail to keep so like Adam Mossoff and all these objectivists, these guys, Heritage Foundation and the Federal Society, they're always pushing for strengthening patents. And so I don't know who would pay me to do it, but it certainly hasn't hurt. But, I've been as loud as I could be. I mean, I've written books on it. I give talks on it. I've taught courses on it. My next book is going to be called Copy This Book. That's what I'm working on this year. So I don't know if I
wrote Steal This Book. Who was that?
Yeah, Abby Hoffman wrote Steal This Book. So I'm sort of I'm going off of his. But the problem with his is he was basically selling a book for profit while condemning private property.
Right,
So he's a
right.
little bit hypocritical. My book is called Copy This Book, and I'm against intellectual property law, so I don't have a problem with you copying it. And I will give a copy out for free on my website. So I'm being consistent. I'm being consistent, unlike him.
So, yeah, IP has been your beat for a while, so to speak. Not that that's the only thing you do. I have to imagine, well, you tell me. I can think of reasons why there would be cracks in the unshakable belief in IP due to your work and the work of others, and also just from technology making it so difficult
Yeah.
to actually keep your, especially digital stuff, secure.
Yeah.
I mean, we've come a long way since Napster, and that almost, set the industry of music on fire. And now it's just, and what AI is doing,
Yep.
it's. Do you think that we're within, the horizon's line of sight from just being done with IP, or do you think people will double down and we'll never be rid of it?
Well, the problem is there's been so much propaganda, and it's just so it permeates our society so much. Everyone, they believe the myths about it, and so they in their minds it's so entwined with innovation and
Yeah,
technology, which is a good thing, which they think is a good thing. Um, and people have trouble. Like if you talk to an intelligent person, and I can give them my IP argument in 15 minutes, and a lot of them will get it. They still have questions. They'll go like, "Well, what about this?" But they get it. But most people can't hear a sustained 15-minute argument. So they have trouble. So most people, even if they increasingly see problems or with the IP system, they think of it as abuses, or they'll say something like the patent system is broken, but they can never see that it's inherently bad and that needs to be abolished. They want to fix it. They want to repair it. They always want to tweak it. So if you point out like, well, AI is this great new tool, but it's being hampered by copyright lawsuits because
hmm
you have to train these things on big data models, and the only way to do it is to scrape all the information we have, which is books and libraries and internet stuff. And even if you get a license from the New York Times, that's kind of like a narrow subset of it. You want to get as much as you can,
yeah.
and it's almost impossible to get enough licenses for all that because of copyright. So it's hobbling it. It's going to slow it down and hobble it, and people are going to notice that. But if you say, well, then we should abolish copyright, they'll say, well, that's too extreme. We need to relax the laws to allow for AI, but you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So it's really hard for people to get a principled. And the other thing is, everyone is so pragmatic and utilitarian. They don't have any principled view to. They don't have any principled approach to anything, which is a good thing that they're pragmatic, but they just can't think in principled terms. They can't see that if you're in favor of private property and justice, you should be in favor at 100%.
Oh, I agree.
They want it 82%, or something.
But along the pragmatic lines, I don't know if this exists, but I can certainly see a use for a slim book just going through not just AI, but all the various uh, aspects of our productivity and entrepreneurship that are being strangled by thickets of patents just getting in the way.
And
That
that's what I plan to do in my book. I'm going to try to make this a comprehensive. Like I'm going to try to make everything I wrote before then obsolete.
excellent.
Take everything I've written and distill it down to the kind of final definitive treatment. So it may be 200 pages, but I don't know.
That's great because you need that because people will read a theory.
Yeah.
But hey, Marx had a theory too. How do we know that this one's right? They
Yeah.
can't really think through it. But examples, that's what makes people finally see it.
Yes, I know. And that's why Bolger and Levine's book Against Intellectual Monopoly was good. That helped Jeff Tucker see the light. And then he was open to my theories. Although I love Bolger and Levine, but the more I think about their book, the weaker and weaker I think it is. Because again, it's not principled, but it's pretty damn good for someone who they started writing that book as mainstream economists, and they were hoping they suspected they would find proof, some kind of empirical proof that patents are essential to innovation and stimulate it. But the more they looked into it, they concluded. So that's a decent, honest researcher. They got the opposite result than they expected, and they went ahead and they went with it. So that's an honest, good, sincere researcher. But yeah, you're right. So the IP thing has it's sort of like when some actor is well known for one role and then they get typecast. And I don't quite have that problem, but a lot of people know me mainly for that. But as I mentioned, my first thing was on rights, and then I've written on a variety of other areas. That's my general interest. IP was just necessary it's one missing piece in the general picture of what property rights and libertarianism are.
It
And
was the
actually,
piece that didn't fit. It was a weird one.
So figuring that out actually helped clarify my views on contract theory and on property rights theory. It strengthened them. But those are independent areas I've written about, which is why my book from 2023,
right over your shoulder there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is. I mean, it's got a big section on IP, but there's the 5 other areas I write about, which. So I don't mind being known mainly by some people for only IP. It's okay with me. But I think most people who read my stuff know that it's broader than that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been great. Is there anything else you wanna tell me and our viewers before we let you go?
Well, maybe some listeners will be the type that might email me with questions about being a lawyer or law school and advice, which I get from time to time over the years. And so, and I've got a group of lawyer friends, libertarian lawyer friends like Jacob Hubert and others. And I've collected in more of an ad hoc fashion on my website, stephankinsella.com. I think if you go to it's like something like advice for prospective law students or something like that. So I've kind of collected some advice I've given over the years about careers in law as a libertarian. And I'm always open. People can always text me or email. Not text me, but message me or email me if they have questions. I'm always open to questions like that.
Well, we'll definitely link to your website and to your Twitter. Is that good?
Yeah,
Good
I'm on Twitter and Facebook at NS Kinsella. My first name is Norman, so it's NS Kinsella on both of those.
And your website one more time?
StephanKinsella.com.
Fantastic, sir. Well, thank you so much for coming on and answering my annoying questions and just telling us about your life. I think what you've done is admirable. I think more people should look you up and see all the things that you've written.
I appreciate it. I've kind of enjoyed being an academic without having to be an academic and put up with academic politics and academic pay.
Or students.
And stupid students, yeah.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you, Stephan. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please go to hamannature.substack.com and support the show. Become a paid subscriber. And you'll also, if you sign up, get the articles I write. And we'll link to all of Stephan's stuff. So thank you again, Stephan. And we'll catch you next time on Haman Nature.